Morning, everyone. We're just waiting for people to join, so I can see the numbers clocking up. So just bear with us a second. Can you all hear me okay? Some people nodding good, thanks. Right, the numbers are sort of ticking up, but it's gone 9:30, so I suggest we start. Just to introduce myself, I'm Matt Saker, the president of the IFoA. I'll be hosting today's session. Very lucky today to be joined by some esteemed colleagues. We've got Danny Quant and Malcolm Slee, who you can see hopefully to the right of your screen, who are both council members. So they'll be contributing today. And we also have Annette Spencer, who many of you know, who's the IFoA's Director of Public Affairs and Research. Annette will be sort of coordinating the questions later on. So yeah, the purpose of today, as you can see on the screen, hopefully, is to talk about the proposed change in designations and post-nominals to include the term chartered. So what we're going to be doing today is explaining exactly what the changes are. We'll be talking about the advantages that we think this change will bring both to the profession, but also to you as members. We're going to try and do a bit of myth busting and answer some potential questions that you might have around the concept of introducing the term chartered. So I've got a few slides here which I'll walk you through. Really the main purpose of this is really to allow you to sort of hear what we've got to say and most importantly ask questions. At the end of the day, this isn't a very complex change. The rationale for it and the benefits I think are quite straightforward. So me taking you through the slides is probably only going to take 15-20 minutes at most. But then at that point we'll be stopping and we'll be opening up to Q&A. So this is really your opportunity to ask any questions that you have. Hopefully, we'll be able to answer the majority of your questions between us. But if there are any questions that we aren't able to answer today, then we'll commit to sort of addressing them afterwards. We're working on an FAQ, a frequently asked questions document, which will be published on the website shortly, and which we plan to circulate after this session to you all, along with the recording of the session. So yeah, if there are any questions we can't deal with today, then we'll try and pick them up in that FAQ document. Okay, so what is the proposal? I'll get into that straight away. Here it is on this slide. So it is relatively straightforward. The proposal is that for fellows, members will be designated Chartered Actuary Fellow, and we'll be able to use the post-nominals FIA C-Act if they're a member of the Institute, FFA C-Act if they're a faculty member. But importantly, you can just retain your existing post-nominals if you want. So you continue to use FIA or FFA if that's what you prefer. So in simple terms, this means that in your business cards or your email signature, you can refer to yourself as being Chartered Actuary Fellow, and after your name, as I say, use these post-nominals. Similarly for associates. Again, Chartered Actuary Associate and the post-nominals AIA C-Act, FA if you're a fellow, a member of the faculty, CACT, or just continue to use your existing post-nominals. So that's in simple terms, that's what the proposal is. What we thought we'd do is actually have a poll at the start here. We're going to have a poll at the start and then a poll at the end to sort of gauge where people are in their thinking on this. I guess most of you joined just to find out a bit more about this. But Nikki, I don't know whether you can put the poll up. Yeah, so here we go. So just to gauge where people are, if you could just answer this simple question: how do you intend to vote on the proposal to adopt the designated chartered actuary? So, you know, if you're veering towards yes, then yes or no. But if you're undecided, then please click on undecided. So, just give you a few seconds to vote on that. And just as a reminder, the hosts, myself and the others I introduced earlier, aren't allowed to vote on this. Okay, that's interesting. It's kind of what I suspected. I suspected that a lot of people have joined because they are undecided. They want to find out more. A few are veering towards yes, obviously, and some no. So that's interesting. So yeah, thanks, Nikki. If you could just remove that now. Let's crack on. Right. Why are we proposing these changes? Well, look, we can use the term chartered. The reason we can use it is because we have a royal charter as part of the profession. So that's in simple terms why we are able to use the term chartered. You'll be aware that a number of other professions do already use the term chartered. So solicitors use it, accountants use it, engineers use it. So but for whatever reason, the IFoA has never used it in the past. We are quite unique amongst actuarial membership bodies in that we are the only one that has a royal charter, and so we are the only actuarial membership body around the world that actually has this facility to actually use the term chartered. I sort of view it, I guess, as a little bit of an untapped talent. You know, we can argue as to why we haven't utilised it in the past, but it does feel like an asset that we haven't tapped in the past, and is one that we think is beneficial. That's why we're proposing this change now. And it's important to remember, actually, one of the reasons we are making this change is that the term actuary isn't protected. So anyone actually can call themselves an actuary, whether they're an IFoA member or not, or whether they've taken any exams, actuarial exams or not. So you know, anyone can use the term actuary to describe themselves, and that is one of the drivers why we're introducing this change to recognise those actuaries that are actually members of the IFoA and therefore subject to all that entails. So I've got a couple of slides here talking about the benefits. First of all, from the profession's perspective. So there's a few bullet points here. Laying the foundations for a flourishing profession. We do know from work we've done previously that traditional employers of actuaries, so insurance companies, consultancies, etc., are pretty supportive of this. But more importantly, really, it's a key facilitator, really, I think, of the IFoA's current strategy, part of which is to widen the fields in which actuaries work, so to reposition the profession. We think that's important, you know, to enable the profession and the IFoA to grow. And so while it's important for our traditional employers, the interesting angle, I think, is that, you know, our existing employers know us well, so it's not quite such a game changer for them. But if we're looking to move into new fields, employers in other sectors that, for example, banking or other areas beyond that, who don't know actuaries so well, then we do think that this is quite important, because there's certainly, kudos attached to the term chartered. It's generally recognised that, it's a recognised term, and we do think it would be beneficial for us in that respect. And to be frank, that's why a lot of other professionals do use the term, because that kudos point. If you think of accountants, there's definitely a distinction between say a certified accountant and a chartered accountant, with the latter being seen at a much higher level than the former. So it does reflect we think the high standards that we apply as a profession, as an IFoA, through our ethical standards and our technical standards. And the last 2 points there, it distinguishes in a couple of important ways, actually. It distinguishes us as members of the IFoA from those that aren't members, that are perhaps calling themselves actuaries, or perhaps are former members of the IFoA but have given up their membership and therefore aren't subject to the same CPD requirements, professional standards, etc. So we think that's important. But it also, as it says at the bottom there, the last bullet point, it differentiates us from other actuarial membership bodies. So we are the only body that can use the term chartered. So why wouldn't we? I don't want to overplay that one. In the UK, it doesn't necessarily distinguish us hugely, but we shouldn't underestimate the impact it has in certain markets outside of the UK. For example, in Asia, where we're competing with other membership bodies such as the Society of Actuaries, we think this is a differentiator for us. And at the margin, it could change someone's decision whether when they're entering the profession, whether to go with the IFoA or the Society of Actuaries. So those are some benefits from the profession's perspective. These are the benefits from a few of the benefits we see from a member's perspective. I suppose the key point I want to make here is that I really struggle to see any downside here. We talk about and hopefully address some of the concerns in a minute, and you can ask questions at the end. But the main thing I want to get across here is that I think there is only upside here. There's a few points listed here. It does enhance our status globally, we think. Again, it's not a game changer, but it is certainly incremental, and there's no negative points, I don't think. It does preserve our existing status, and we as you've seen, we are distinguishing between fellow and associate, so that gold standard for fellows is protected through this, which is a change from when we've proposed this before, and we certainly recognise that as a concern, or have recognised that as a concern, and have addressed that. And as I said earlier, it does enhance the recognition outside of the profession. For those who know us well, perhaps it's not a massive game changer, and we all need to position the change quite carefully, those people, to explain why we're doing it. But certainly for those outside the profession, which hopefully will become increasingly more exposed to it, it is important. And as it says at the bottom there, serves as a symbol of excellence for potential employers. So again, it's that sort of kudos point. And we think it's really important that, when any stakeholder is dealing with an actuary, they are clear that actuary is subject to, the right standards, and then going back to the actuaries code, ethical standards, the technical standards, and also the CPD requirements. That is really important, protects us all, I think. Okay, this slide we've put together to hopefully address and preempt maybe some questions that you might have. We announced that we were doing this a while back. I've blogged, and I've written an article in the Actuary. There's been some feedback on social media, most of which is positive, not all of which is positive. That some questions have been raised, so we're trying to sort of address some key concerns here, and if you like, maybe do some myth busting. So one of the key concerns was blurring the line between qualifications. So this doesn't do that. We are very clear in this proposal, at least. We weren't in previous times. This has come up, but we are very clear now that there is a distinction between fellow and associate, and that is clear in the designations that we're now proposing here. Yeah, some people have felt that this is potentially diminishing fellows. We don't think that's the case. I mean, it's essentially elevating both. It goes back to my point around there's no real downside, I don't think. I mean, we're essentially elevating associates and fellows, so both can use the term chartered, but recognizing the difference. Elevating associates, it does elevate associates, but it does also elevate fellows. And just to be absolutely clear on this, associates are qualified actuaries. There has been some misunderstanding of this, I think. Our associate curriculum is completely aligned with the IAA, the International Actuarial Association's global standard for what constitutes a qualified actuary. And in many jurisdictions, many countries, that's all there is. So typically, if you go to continental Europe, their exams essentially stop at the associate level. They don't have an equivalent of the fellowship. So our associates are qualified actuaries. And to say that they're not is doing them a huge disservice, certainly relative to actuaries that aren't IFoA members, for example, those in continental Europe. But they aren't qualified actuaries to the level of fellowship. Fellowship will always be our gold standard at the IFoA, and always will be hugely important. It's important that we recognise that those associates are qualified, but albeit not to the fellowship level. And to give you a bit of context to that as well, actually, we have 30-odd thousand members globally. Just over half of those, or around half of those, are qualified actuaries in some form. The vast majority of those are fellows. So I think it's a little over 15,000 are fellows. And only a relatively small number, so less than 1,000. I think it's about 800 are associates. So, it's not a huge issue, and that shows you that most of our IFoA members actually pass through the associate level, but continue to take the fellowship exams and actually ultimately qualify as fellows rather than remaining at the associate level. So hopefully that's clear that up. Lowering IFoA standards, again, I can assure you there's this is what you're seeing here is the totality of the change. There's nothing sinister going on behind the scenes. We're not lowering standards in any way. The education, the qualifications, the exams are all unchanged as a result of this. So there's absolutely no impact on standards, and clearly that's hugely important that the IFoA does retain retain the right standards and keeps the bar at the right level. Some people have the naming of this and the post nominals. We recognise that that's a very emotive subject for members. I think back to when we did the merger vote over a decade ago, and that failed the first time round, and the main reason it failed was because people didn't like the name that we were proposing. So we recognise that is important, and we thought about that. We what we proposed to you earlier is what we've agreed with Privy Council. So we can't change it now. That's what they've approved before it went to council approval. But importantly, if you don't want to have C-Act after your name as a post nominal, you don't have to. You can continue to use the letters that you've always used in the past. So you have that option, which again plays into my point about there not being any downside here. And the final point there, we did this has bubbled up a few times. We've uncovered over the year, whether we should use chartered or not, whether we should introduce it. As I say, it's an untapped asset. It did actually come up at the time of the merger. It wasn't progressed at that time. We did also bring it up. Some of you will remember more recently in 2018, where we consulted informally with members. Just to be clear, it wasn't rejected by members at that time, but we did consult with a number, around about 1,000 of our members. At that time, the proposal was quite different. We were proposing just introducing Chartered Actuary, and that would apply to both fellows and associates, so it was quite different. And understandably at the time that the feedback was that didn't differentiate between fellows and associates. And that's that's a completely understandable reaction, and that's the main reason that the council actually decided not to progress with the proposals at that time. So time's moved on, we've reflected on that, and we've listened to you as members, and are coming back with this revised proposal, which hopefully addresses that concern. Okay, voting process, just so you know where we are in the process. This did go to Privy Council in May this year, and they have agreed in principle and were comfortable for us to progress it. It went to IFoA Council in June this year. We required a 75% majority at council, and we managed to gain that majority, so it passed through council. Because it does require a change in our bylaws, it needs to go to a member vote. So we're planning that member vote for November to December, probably launching around the middle of November and running for a month to the middle of December. So that is the plan, and we don't need a 75% majority for members, because we had that for council. It's a simple majority vote. If that vote is successful, that will set up a train of other work. We will need to go back to Privy Council for formal approval and an affirmative vote from them. The nature of these things, unfortunately, it does take a fair bit of time. It can take up to a year, so hopefully we'll be able to get it through more quickly than that. But it will take, I'd imagine, at least 6 months, probably 6 months to a year. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because it will give us time to make sure that this change is positioned appropriately with other stakeholders, so it doesn't come as a shock. I've been out and about talking to members, practice boards and other forums about this change, and one of the questions that has come up is, won't this be a bit of a surprise to employers, when their actuary turns up one day and there's suddenly a chartered actuary and they weren't the day before? Could that be counterproductive? We have thought about that, not in huge amount of detail yet, because we haven't got the vote passed, but if we do, then we will focus very much on a clear comms plan to make sure that this is positioned appropriately with everyone that it needs to be positioned with. Okay, I think that was all I wanted to say. I don't think I've missed anything, but at that point, I would suggest we move on to questions. So you can see Annette on the screen smiling away. I've been focusing on what we've been saying, so I haven't seen if any questions have come in. But over to you, Annette, if you want to start sort of coordinating the questions and throwing them out to us, that'd be great.
Well, let me help you with that, Matt. And hello, everybody. And thank you very much, Matt, because I think that was a really helpful and clear walk through what we're proposing, and also, tackling some of those things that we know have been questions and concerns from members about this. I'm just going to start with my usual reminder for those of you that are listening in and watching us. I think most of you are probably very familiar by now that if you want to ask a question, just type it into the Q&A box, and then we can see the question, and then we'll try and work through as many as we can. Occasionally we group things together if there's an obvious theme, but yes, please do use that Q&A function if you want to ask some questions questions on this. I'm going to start with you, Matt. I'm not giving you much of a breather, I'm afraid. I'm going to come straight back to you because I think it's probably important to kind of hear this from the presidential level, and then I will invite Danny and Malcolm perhaps to chip in as well. But it's really clear, more generally, and also from what we're seeing in the Q&A box, that this question about whether chartership somehow makes it really difficult then for the outside world and employers and clients to distinguish between associate and fellow. And I know that you've talked very clearly this morning about why you think that that difference is still clear. But given that we're still getting the question, I just really want to ask the panel to maybe expand a bit and to talk about how and why you think that distinction would still be clear if this chartership proposal goes through.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. So look, I suppose I'd say two things on that. I mean, the first thing is the obvious thing, that chartered applies to associates and fellows. So you know, the most important thing here, I think, is that employers, other stakeholders recognise that if they see the term chartered, they know for sure that the person they're dealing with is a member of the IFoA, and I'll say it again, subject to Actuaries Code, everything else. That's hugely important. The distinction between associate and fellow, you know, it is there. I mean, it's there in the post nominals, and it's there in the designation. You know, I struggle a bit to see how we could make it more obvious. I mean, the words are in there, and it's a definite improvement from where we are today, because at the moment that distinction is more opaque, I think. You know, the actual designation title would you know, as we are today, is just simply actuary. Really, there's no reference to fellow or associate in the designation. It is there in the post nominals through, you know, AIAFA versus FIAFA. But this I think will make it clearer. And as I said, I think that's particularly important as we deal with new stakeholders. Because I think, you know, our current employers, etc., do understand the difference between a fellow and associate, but it will be less obvious to people, to people that are new, you know, are less familiar with the actual profession and less familiar with dealing with actuaries.
Thanks, Matt. I think that you've expanded on what you were saying earlier and really clarified, in a sense, the separation in the designations and how that's going to address the question that I've raised. Malcolm, I wonder if I could ask you to give us a perspective. Yeah, I know you do a lot of work on our professional standards and that kind of thing. What's your kind of perspective on this question about you know, does chartership just, you know, meld the difference between associate and fellow in people's perception?
Yep. I'll probably give you a long answer, slightly roundabout, but just maybe going back to the beginning, both the faculty and the institute, they were both chartered bodies way back in the 19th century, and the IFoA in 2010 retained the chartership. So in some ways, you do wonder, why have we never done this before? But it certainly makes sense that we're doing it now, as Matt says, because maybe because we're going into these wider fields. But I think he's right as well, that there's always been this recognition of either an associate or a fellow. And it is important to retain that differential. The fellows have to do that extra work to get there, and that does need to be recognised. I mean, associates are certainly qualified actuaries, as well as passing exams. They have to do CPD. They have to do their own professional skills courses before they can become associate. So we know that they are still good actuaries, and the fellowship is just that extra step beyond it. So having the two titles, Chartered Actuary Associate, Chartered Actuary Fellow, sort of shows that both of them are actuaries, but also retains that distinction, which I think the members are keen on.
That wasn't too long at all, and I quite like that you focused that back in where this all began.
Can I just
how we
maybe I
kept
could
that.
just add, just it was maybe clear, but just to clarify on one of Matt's points, I think he mentioned the Privy Council twice, and it's just maybe people don't realise, because it's a royal chartered body, if we want to change the way we're called, it has to go to the Privy Council. It's not something that we ourselves can just do unilaterally, which is why they have to be involved. So it is an important decision, why we're taking it seriously and why we're involving them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Malcolm. And because we have to change the bylaws, and we have to have the Privy Council or the external body that give us the permission for that. So you're right, it is important that members understand why there's quite a process around this. So thank you for that. I am going to stay with this subject just because I know it is in many ways kind of a central issue for a lot of our members who are thinking about voting on this. So Danny, I'm going to also ask you your perspective on this. Now, I know that you have served for the IFoA in many ways, including as an examiner. So I think I'm particularly interested in your views on, you know, whether you think this will confuse people about the level of qualification that an actuary has if they're all able to say they're chartered.
Yeah, and there are two angles to this. One is the existing exams. I can sort of confirm as an examiner and a former marker that the current processes in setting the exams, coming up with the questions per the syllabus, setting the syllabus. This discussion about chartered status has not materialized. So there's no reflection in setting the exams and setting the bar at which people or candidates pass the exams is going to be changed as a result of what we're doing. The same level of standards are being maintained. So there's absolutely no question of reducing standards or anything like that. So in order to become an associate and then ultimately a fellow, there is still that rigorous process to go through. That's not changing. We're not having discussions as we set the exams in that context. The other angle to it is actually within our education framework, our aspirations to enable our students to engage in wider fields and developing additional qualifications within our framework to enable our students to become associates and fellows with a particular niche type of qualifications, whether it's in ESG, whether it's in climate change, whether it's in special financial modeling, our banking ideas and so on. So I think it should be clear that actually our education system and our examining system is being further enhanced and made even more rigorous as time goes by to position actuaries as having a role to play in wider society beyond our traditional fields. And I think actually the chartered thing on the back of doing that will enhance it even more. It provides the brand, it provides the recognition, and going back to the point about Privy Council, having looked at the deliberations that Privy Council went through in our provisional application to them for this, they don't simply just rubber stamp this. They look at this really, really critically, and the discussion back and forward and clarifications and challenges that they come back to us imply that they take it very, very seriously. So the fact that they have endorsed it provisionally, subject to member endorsement, is a signal that it's been thought about very, very carefully, and they don't give up lightly. It has to be said. Hence, I mean, Matt was saying it's going to take another year potentially for it to actually go formally. It is taken very, very seriously. So Don't be concerned about standards. There still will be a very high bar to get to associate level, and a higher bar even further, the gold standard that Matt referred to get to fellowship status. And as an examiner, we're not changing. We're certainly not going backwards anyway.
Thanks, Danny. So I think I've heard kind of two things in there. I've heard that this makes absolutely no difference to the rigor that you as the examiners and our colleagues who set the exams and the qualifications, that does not get diluted in any way by this chartership. And I also thought it was really interesting what you were saying just about the amount of attention and scrutiny that these proposals and what we're trying to do here get from, for example, the Privy Council. And I know also there's been a lot of scrutiny internally and of course from you all on council. So I hope what we're conveying to the people who are listening into us is that this is not this has been a long and very thorough process, but I particularly like what you're saying about the rigor on the qualifications, and as you said, the fact that we are broadening out the different types of things that current and future actuaries will be able to be qualified in through wider credentials and so on. So in a sense, it's going to become a much broader landscape, but without diluting the standards. Is that a fair reflection of what you said?
Yep,
okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Danny. Matt, we've got a question which is a really important question, but I think in some ways quite a simple one to answer. And I can only guess that this might be from someone who is currently a student member. So they're asking the question, why is it that students can't vote on this? It's only qualified members who get a vote on these proposals. So the question is, why can't students vote?
Yeah. I mean, it is a simple answer. That's just what the bylaws require and say. So it's not a choice that we can make. You know, any change to the bylaws, which this is, has to go to members, but it has to be qualified members. So it's only associates and fellows. So it's as simple as that. So it's not a choice that we've made. That's just the way that our constitution works.
Thanks, Matt. That's nice and clear. I mean, I think it's an interesting question because obviously, in a sense, the students are the future. But obviously, our constitution is the way it is. So
yeah. I mean,
clarification.
It's a separate question as to whether students should be able to vote on things like this that isn't the subject of today. I mean, what I would say is that, you know, from the discussions I've had, discussions we've had, you know, I think it's fair to say that students would be overwhelmingly supportive of this, actually. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's my sense as well. I mean, actually, that probably takes us quite nicely into the next question that I'd like to take us to, which is that someone has asked us, how likely do we think it is that members are going to vote in favour of this proposal? And they're particularly talking about the fact that obviously there was the scepticism when we did the consultation a few years ago. And so they're interested in that. And actually the questioner, hopefully the panelists can see the question. The questioner says, personally, they think this is a no-brainer. So that's encouraging. And that will elevate the profile of actuaries in wider markets and fields. But that what they've heard from other actuaries they speak to is that there's a lot of skepticism. So I think the question is, and I think I might come to Danny first on this one, actually, if I may, Danny, just to get a feel for the panelists' level of confidence in how likely you think it is that members will vote for this proposal.
I think the way I would respond is I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it was the right thing to do. I wrote an article in this month's Actuary magazine with Charles Cowling on the subject. Our sentiments were very similar, and needless to say, I took it from an international perspective, having worked overseas for many years, and see this as a really strong feature for the profession, and will enhance our brand, as I've used the phrase earlier on. And so you know, I would expect it to go through. I acknowledge, however, that there is some misunderstanding. Some of it is misleading and is misunderstood. That's why we're trying to do this. And for fear of mentioning one of the other questions that has come up, that there's a view that perhaps we're being a bit defensive. I think inevitably in a situation like this, we're going to come across slightly as defensive, because we're trying to address the concerns that those who are not so sure about it are conveying to us, either directly or via others. And so I think it's important to pitch this to address the perceptions that this is not the right thing to do, and help people understand that there isn't a hidden agenda here, where we're being open about it, but we're also trying to preserve our traditions. Where, you know, as Malcolm said, the faculty in the Institute go back 150, 138 years, and the merger is now nearly 15 years. We have a history to maintain, and I think it's important that we maintain our traditions, but at the same time, we have to look to the future. We have to look at the sustainability and the way in which our profession is viewed outside. And I'd go back again to something that was mentioned earlier, but not in these words, and that is, it's a bit remiss that we haven't taken advantage of being chartered. A chartered profession and having a royal charter. Why have we not taken advantage of what is basically a gift, without diminishing any of the rigor, without diminishing any of the elevation that fellow has, being the gold standard? So why wouldn't we do this? So I think it is right that we address the concerns, and I don't think it's necessarily surprising that we're coming across as slightly defensive, because we are trying to defend the position. So back to your first question, Annette, I'd like to think that we're going to get this through. I'd like to think we'll get it through comfortably.
Thanks, Danny. So you're saying you understand the question in a sense and the doubt, but you are confident, and in a sense quite surprised that we haven't done it so far.
Yes,
Annette, can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with everything Danny's just said. I mean, I think, as I said earlier, I've been out and about talking to members about this. And when it's explained to people, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority have said, yeah, it makes sense, can see why you want to do that. But we need to recognise that quite often with this sort of change, there is quite an initial emotional response to it, you know, because people are attached to their current post-nominals, for example. And so there is a little bit of a hump that needs to be got over. And I would say myself that when I first saw this as a member of council a number of years ago, that I had that initial response, but you know, once I looked at it, I kind of got over that quite quickly, and can see the benefits. And you used the term no-brainer, which I didn't use, but I used sort of no downside, but it's the same thing really. But my biggest concern here, and actually is around people just getting out and voting, because we do have an issue which we saw recently. I won't go into it, but we had a vote on honorary members, and it wasn't passed by our members, but based on a really, really low turnout. And look, there are people we know who are against this, and generally they're in a group that are against any change. And we know from experience that those people always come out, they always vote, and they always vote against. And what we've typically seen historically, and we saw this a couple of months ago with the honorary fellow vote, is that those people that are sort of, you know, indifferent or perhaps slightly supportive don't bother voting or don't get round to voting because they're busy. Now, you know, my appeal to you guys is, first of all, just vote. Whether you agree or not, I'd really appreciate you voting. If this doesn't go through, because we only get 1,000 of our members out of the whatever 16,000 that can vote, then if it's big for that reason, I would be really disappointed. If it doesn't get through and we get a 20, 30, 40% turnout of our members, then that's fine. The members have spoken, and I'll be personally disappointed, but we move on. But that's the key thing. I think we just need to get enough people out voting, enough people engaged, which is why we're running these sessions, explaining what we're doing, and then you're the members, so you have the final word, and we all respect that. So that is the main risk, I think, and the main challenge we have. Yeah.
So your strategy is get out and vote. Go on, Malcolm.
Yeah, it's related to those last 2 points of Matt and Danny, really. There's a question sort of saying, why isn't there more debate on the reasons against the proposal? And I think I'd say sort of, in a way, we have addressed that, as that thinking through why is it necessary and what the point of it. The main concerns are the fact, well, does it blur the distinction between associate and fellow? You could argue that would be the main reason against the proposal. And I think we've put up a sound argument about why this proposal actually resolves that issue, and it shouldn't be an issue, because they are still recognised and can be seen quite separately. And I think the other one is probably again what Matt says, people saying, well, why bother? Why do we need the change? Why can't we just carry on as we are now? And to some extent, you could carry on as you are now, as Matt showed on the slide. If you want to, you could still call yourself an FIA or an FFA. You don't have to put down the new sort of post-nominant or the Chartered Actuary, but you can do if you want to. So I think from our perspective, we didn't think there were many sort of negative reasons for doing it. And the potential ones that were negative, you might say it's been structured to try and reduce them to a minimum.
Thanks, Malcolm. I mean, I think that's been really strong from all three of you, actually, in response to that particular question. I mean, we've strayed a bit away from just a straight level of confidence, but I think actually the points you all make are really strong, particularly the get out and vote. And I do think, as we see in the wider world as well, people who are against something are very motivated to vote. So those who are perhaps neutral or positive need to also be as motivated to get out and vote. And I think you put that really well, Matt. So I am going to move us on because I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I'm hoping we can squeeze a couple more questions in. So Matt, I'm going to come to you now with one which, again, I hope is a reasonably straightforward one to answer, at least. So there's a question that says, what happens if, assuming chartership goes through, what then happens if a member withdraws their membership of the IFoA? Are they still chartered?
The short answer is no, and actually that's one of the things that we are looking to protect against. Actually, our retention rate is phenomenally high. It's in the UK, it's sort of 98%. We get very few people resigning their membership, but inevitably there is a small trickle, and multiple reasons why people give up their membership. But those individuals won't be able to use the term chartered. It's as simple as that. And going back to what I said earlier, that the reason that's important is for example, from an employer perspective, we think it's really, really important that an insurance company or a pension consultant or whoever's using actuaries, are aware of the status of their actuaries. And if someone's not using the term chartered, they know that they aren't subject to all the rigmarole rigmarole is the wrong word, but all the really useful standards and technical guidance and everything else that applies as an IFoA member. People are absolutely allowed to exercise their prerogative to give up their membership, but they will be giving up that term chartered if they do, and therefore I think it will be a lot clearer than in the past that they aren't an IFoA member, and I think that's important.
Thanks, Matt. I think that's very clear, and particularly, as you say, signalling by the chartered designation, if it went through, it's a really easy way for people outside the profession to see, are you in the profession or are you outside it? And obviously the membership of the IFoA is a part of that in many ways. So thank you for the clarification on that. Look, some of my job here is to also try and kind of bring both sides of the argument in, if you like, provide a bit of neutrality, if you like, on this. So there is a really good question, which really, if I summarize it, says, why aren't we putting both sides of the argument? So what they're hearing from you as a panel is all the reasons why members should support these proposals, but there are some strong arguments on the other side, and why aren't they hearing those? So Matt, I mean, difficult question in some ways, but I wonder if you could start, and I will come to the other panelists as well, in a sense on either whether you want to address what are the other sides of the argument, or in a sense, why is it that you're leaning towards the arguments that support the proposals?
Yeah, good question, and look, apologies if this comes across as, this whole thing comes across as biased, and I did want to reiterate a comment from Danny earlier that, you know, generally there's nothing sinister in here. What you're seeing here is it. You know, there's nothing sinister going on behind the scenes here at all. You know, there's been stuff on social media around whether there's an obscure, you know, legal reason why we're doing this. There's not. I mean, you know, what you see is what you get here. Absolutely. And as I said, you know, I really struggle to see the downside to this. And you know, so again, I've been out and about talking to people. No one has raised you know, a showstopper with me at all. The only issue that hopefully we've addressed today, that people have raised with me, and you know, that I've seen elsewhere, is around the whole associate fellow thing, and hopefully be clarified. You know, I think there has been some misunderstanding amongst our membership that associates aren't qualified actuaries, and hopefully I put that to bed. They are qualified actuaries, and not calling that is doing them a disservice. So people were concerned, I think, that this was somehow elevating associates, and that would be somehow detrimental to fellows. And you know, I just don't think it is, for the reasons that we've explained. It's elevating everyone, but it's retaining the distinction. You know, and I can understand why people had that confusion and misunderstanding, but that's the only negative that I've really credible negative that I've seen. So but I'm happy to hear it. You know, that's why we're holding this webinar. If people want to, you know, maybe there's something we haven't thought of, but I've not seen anything yet from anyone anywhere. So yeah, simple as that, really.
No, thanks, Matt. I think that you are at least acknowledging, you know, what you see as the one clear thing to you, that you kind of the opposing argument you've heard. So I'm sure to the person who asked that question, at least there's that acknowledgement. I wonder if I might just briefly ask, I'll come to Malcolm first. Is there anything you'd want to add on this particular point, Malcolm, the sort of the two sides of the argument?
Really agreeing with Matt in that I think I'd say if we do this, which I hope we do, really it's just, shall we say, adding another string to your bow of this is who you are, and it's difficult to say, so what are the detrimental aspects? And there isn't many that you can really see. And I think the only one you really can see is the fellow associate qualification, which is what we have tried to clarify. Everything else you might say, it's just an extra plus for everybody.
Great, thank you, Malcolm. Danny, anything from you? I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in before we go, but just anything from you on this one?
No, why don't you squeeze in another question, just to be fair?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll be fair, Danny, and I'll bring that well, it might be the last question. I'm going to look at the president. He's probably going to call time on me at some point. But what I think might be the last question, I'm going to start with you, Danny. That only seems fair. So it says that obviously we've talked a lot about increasing the distinction and the level of protection afforded to qualified actuaries compared to people who are not. And the question is, what does that mean in practice? And would there be penalties for people who falsely represented themselves as actuaries under this?
I mean,
chartership regime.
technically, anybody can call themselves an actuary with a small a. Using a dictionary definition, you can call yourself an actuary, and nobody can necessarily dispute that, possibly until after you've delivered the work and failed to deliver. But it would be fraud to call yourself a chartered actuary, fellow or associate. That would be fraud. We got no test at the moment as to whether anybody would attempt to do that, because we've not had the chartered status yet. But going forward, it will be fraud, much like it is fraud to call yourself a chartered accountant if you're not. And there are civil penalties. I don't know the legal position, but I just know it is the case. So you're on very, very dangerous ground if you portray yourself as a chartered actuary in this way. And just going back to the point, if circumstances are such that in the situation you're in, that describing yourself as just simply FIA or AIA, FFA, then go ahead. We're not saying that you have to call yourself chartered. The opportunity here is to actually call yourself chartered in the future when you weren't able to previously. So, repeating the line, there's no downside here. You can continue to use your previous designations if your circumstances are such that is the advantage to you. Use the old designations, but now you have an alternative which we think has value and will have value in the future. And if it has value in the future, you can use it. There's an upside.
Thanks, Danny. I think that's a really good point, that, in a sense, members would have a choice if chartership goes through, but also in terms of actually the penalties that it would enable us to then bring against people who weren't qualified and weren't chartered, who were claiming it. So thank you for that. I can see that we are nearly out of time, so I am going to hand the microphone back to the President, and you can have the last word.
Thanks,
Thank
Annette.
you. And thank you to everyone who asked questions as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. And if you're just humorous, I'd like to rerun the poll if I can, actually. So Nikki, we asked you the poll. Here we go. That was very quick, Nikki. So we're only giving you yes or no now. There's no undecided. So you're going to have to make a choice. Although you clearly don't have to vote if you don't want to. But if you could just quickly click on I'm just curious to see whether we swayed anyone one way or the other. So let's just leave that for a few more seconds, and then Nikki, if you could just put the result up once you can see that enough people have voted. Oh, well, there you go. I think that feels positive. Maybe you're just being nice, but if we get that result in November, December, I think we'll be very pleased. So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Nikki. Look, we're out of time. Conscious people have started to drop off. I just want to thank the panelists for attending and giving your time today. Thanks, Annette, for hosting the questions. You did expertly as usual. Thank you all for attending. Thanks for engaging. It means a lot to us that you've turned up today and asked the questions. It's been helpful for us. And I'll just finish by saying, please again vote. The emails will be coming round. There'll be reminders. So if you can take the time, it only takes a few seconds literally to vote. And if you're advocates, can I just ask you to be advocates, whether it's on social media or within your employers, and encourage people to vote, and to encourage people to engage and read the materials that will be on the website and will be coming around to members shortly. That was it. We will circulate a recording and also the FAQ document that I mentioned, so you see that all that stuff will be going up on the website as well. Brilliant. So with that, I will leave it there. But thanks everyone again, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much.